This is Khatt Chronicles, design stories from the Arab world. My name is Huda Smitshuijzen AbiFarès, and I have with me today Lebanese type designer Kristyan Sarkis. Kristyan is the founder of the type foundry TPTQ Arabic. His design education started at NDU, Notre Dame University in Lebanon, before he moved to the Netherlands to pursue postgraduate studies in type design at the Type and Media program of the Royal Art Academy in The Hague. Shortly after his graduation, he founded a partnership with the Dutch TPTQ foundry, the Arabic sister foundry, called TPTQ Arabic. He's been practicing strictly as a professional type designer ever since. He is also interested in teaching Arabic type design, and next to teaching at Type and Media in The Hague, he conducts workshops on type design and lettering in collaboration with other colleagues and institutions. Kristyan was a member in one of the Khatt Foundation's type design research projects, typographic matchmaking in the Maghreb, between 2015 and 2017. Several of his typeface designs have received international awards, and they are recognized for their design excellence and innovation. This includes his first Diwani-style typeface, Thuraya, then his Nasr-style typeface, Greta Arabic, and his Maghribi-style Kanduz font family, to name but a few. His lettering work and poster designs are widely acclaimed and have been exhibited internationally and published in several international publications on design. His work expresses a contemporary representation of the Arabic script in lettering as well as in digital fonts, and focuses on projects of cultural relevance to the Arab world at large. Please join me in welcoming Kristyan Sarkis to Khatt Chronicles. Hi, Kristyan.
Hello, Huda. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I think it's good to start by, on a personal note. I mean, we've met a long time ago, almost. I don't know anymore, but a long time ago through common friends in Amsterdam when you were still a student. I don't know if you remember what year it was, but if you do, it would be nice to tell a bit, maybe from your perspective, your journey into design and into becoming a type designer.
That's true. We met actually in 2009, 2010, sometime in between. This is when I was doing type media. I had just finished working 2 years in Qatar, and before that in Muhtaraf Design Studio in Beirut with Yara, who was my teacher in NDU. And that's where it started, actually. The whole thing started with Yara. I know she will not be happy about me saying this because I keep, every time I'm being asked about this, I attribute the start to Yara. She was the one who noticed that I have a knack for this, and she told me this specific sentence: "You have a knack for this." And it was on an uneventful afternoon at Muhtaraf where I was asked to try my hand at a project that we had, a type design project. And the only reason at the time was that I didn't have anything else to do. And so I started, and honestly, I remember very clearly falling in love with this discipline on that specific afternoon. And that's it. I ended up designing the whole typeface, and with, of course, the support of Yara and Greta Khoury at the time. And that was the very start of it all. And from there on, it was really like my mission to work as much as possible to save the amount of money I needed to move to the Netherlands to go to type and media. At the time, the choice was between type and media and Reading in the UK, but there was Hajak Apelian, who was a close friend of mine, who was already at type and media, and I was getting all the updates and all the exciting stuff they were doing, and I was sold immediately. So that's what happened. I moved to Qatar for 2 years. I was working there and teaching as well, teaching type design before I studied type design, and working on my own stuff to enrich my portfolio at the time, because we didn't really do a lot of type design at school. And then I moved to the Netherlands, and everything started properly, professionally in type and media.
So where did you teach in Qatar?
At the VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good university. I mean,
that's where I met a lot of colleagues that I know now as well, like Basma and Munira, and of course Diane, who was also my teacher at NDU.
Good. So what does it feel like to be now, to go back now that you teach in type and media? So your perspective is like now the teacher rather than the student.
To be honest, I still feel very much like a student, even though I'm too old now just to say this. But I mean, with giants in the industry who are the teachers there, who are incredible at their own disciplines, I always feel, honestly, like a student next to them. I mean, at the end of the day, they were also all my teachers. But yeah, now as a teacher, I try. I mean, the studies that we did at Type Media affected my whole career, the way I look at type or the type design discipline as a whole. And so what I teach now is an extension of all the things that I studied. But of course, what I bring is the Arabic script that we didn't study necessarily at the time. There was no one to teach us this. So this is what, what I specialized in. That's what I teach there.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on like how did it affect you? What is, being a type of media? How did it affect your vision of the type design world?
Yeah. So I always get asked that you did Arabic type design in Holland, and I always have the same answer, that I connected with my own script. I learned how to connect with my own script here, and that was because of the approach that we were taught. Type and media focuses a lot on the idea that type comes from writing. Mm-hmm. And so the first semester we spent it writing. So even though we were doing it in Latin, of course, but yeah, that's the concept that type comes from writing, and understanding the intricacy of writing and the effect of the pen, of the tool on the outcome, and understanding the different strokes, the different thicknesses, the contrast, how do they all work in the transition from this hand practice into something digital. That's what helped me build my whole approach to type, and that's of course thanks to the godfather of type and media, Khatt Chronicles, whose theory this was, and it was propagated by his students who are our teachers, or who were our teachers at the time. So yeah, it's this very simple concept that type comes from writing.
I find it interesting that you say writing and not calligraphy. I find that also really something maybe you want to explain a little bit more, because we always think Arabic automatically goes calligraphy, or every time you write Arabic, it's automatically calligraphy.
Yeah, because calligraphy is the art of writing beautifully, but sometimes you can write and it doesn't have to be super beautiful, but you can write to understand the form, to understand the contrast of this form, to understand the construction of a certain letter. And it doesn't have to end up being a beautiful outcome and a masterpiece or an art piece. It's just about the knowledge and the information you can get from writing. And so writing and calligraphy obviously overlap. But the point of this, the reason why I say writing, is because the outcome is not a masterpiece that we look at and appreciate. It's more about learning through the process of writing.
Yeah. I mean, and also it kind of frees you, I guess, from, having to follow a specific grammars of certain calligraphic styles. So you're not really following a calligraphic style, but you are really just learning how to write, and then you can then create your own style or your own free interpretation.
I mean, now I can say something like this, but at the time, I remember clearly that without knowing, it was very unconscious, this whole process. When I started working on Thuraya, my thesis project at the time, I wanted to do something related to the complex style of Diwani, and I went to the calligrapher Ali Asi to learn a lot more about the script. And it was clear for me then, even though again it was not a conscious decision, it was clear for me that I'm not there to learn how to write beautifully or to be able to do calligraphic works in the Diwani, but I was there to learn the structure of the script, the grammar of the script. I was interested to learn the grammar. I wanted to know how the mechanism of the script functions. Mm-hmm. Now, whether I will use it fully or not fully, that's a different thing. But what I wanted to learn is all the knowledge that lies within the script, and the mechanism, and the structure, and the contrast, and so on. And then what ended up being the typeface was a completely different thing. But of course, after I went through the process of first imitating it and then realizing that that's not what I want, I'm not using the same medium. My aim is not to recreate calligraphy. Calligraphy and type are two very different disciplines. We shouldn't aim at recreating one through the other one. And this is something that through the Arabic type design field, it's still quite problematic in the sense of a lot of things are attributed to calligraphy, but they are type, or the other way around. And let's not talk about Arabic calligraphy and lettering. Those are two words that are never separated. A lot of things are called calligraphy, but they are all actually lettering. So for me, those disciplines should stay in their own path, and calligraphy can be developed separately. We lack, for example, a lot of modern Arabic calligraphy. We are still very much stuck in the old ways and the classical stuff, which are gorgeous and beautiful and super wealthy, and we have an amazing heritage. But the point is not to keep getting stuck there, but to try to, evolve and to try to push them forward. But at the same time, type is not the modern version of calligraphy. Type is another discipline completely. Yeah. So that's something that is important to create a distinction in.
Yeah, it's very good that you say this. It also makes me think about, like the ancient or the original or the old version of metal type, where they kind of really worked with calligraphy, with calligraphers, but they were very conscious that they were not making calligraphy, and they kind of tried to find solutions where it's true to the script grammar and to the script structure, but it's simplified in a way that makes it work mechanically, because, a calligraphy is still a piece of, it's a complete piece of work, like a painting, it's not about nice writing. So that's also, I think you make that distinction very nicely, very clearly. You should write about it. We should make that.
Just don't get me started on writing. Writing is always
defining what calligraphy is, defining what typography is, defining what lettering is, defining what type design is. We need those.
I know. I should write about a lot of things, but somehow with writing, it never happens. It's always like, okay, I should, but it's not happening yet.
Yeah. I will ask you one thing that I think, going back to Thuraya, when are you going to publish this as a typeface?
You have to ask that question.
I wonder.
To be honest,
you have to use it. It's such a beautiful typeface.
To be perfectly honest, I don't know if I will ever publish it. I don't know. It's been too long, and now looking at it, I see a lot of things that I would completely redesign. But we'll see. I'm not saying no for sure, but at the moment there are no plans for it. There are a lot of other stuff that I would rather focus on. But in any case, Thuraya's point was more about the experiment of it, especially trying to find a contemporary interpretation of these forms, but also the idea of the slant and how can we bring it into a contemporary context, which at the time was very new in such typefaces to create this kind of the slant, which now became a lot more common as an experiment that you can go through. It's also easier to do technically, but at the time it was a big hassle to be able to manage this kind of slant typographically. And so that's what I take away mostly from Thuraya, this experiment that stays, whether the typeface is published or not. But I mean, you never know.
But it's also, it's also this direction. I guess it kind of also defined your view on how you do your own type design work, of looking at, like if I look at the examples of your Nasr-based fonts or the latest Kunduz font, that they are kind of looking at, a kind of calligraphic heritage, but then exploring it, learning it, understanding it, and then coming up with contemporary variation. Would you say that's kind of like defines how your direction as a type designer, or your passions or interests?
So again, this was not a conscious thing. I just found myself learning about these things through type. And so I would want to discover new forms through certain existing and very established calligraphic styles. But again, the point was not to recreate those styles in a typographic way at all. It was just to learn about them. And for a while, that's what was happening. I wouldn't necessarily say that at the moment this is still how I approach my work. Now I have a lot more knowledge and a lot more confidence to know what kind of forms I'm after, what kind of mixtures I want to put in a certain typeface, and I mix influences from here and there. I also, to be honest, don't like so much that we still categorize typefaces by the calligraphic styles that they could be inspired by. You don't see this happening in Latin, for example, and I think it's time we start moving a bit further than just saying this is a Nasr-based typeface or a Diwani-based typeface, because at the end of the day, they are not Nasr and they are not Diwani. They are very far from them. They are informed by them. They are inspired by them, but I wouldn't call them a Nasr-based typeface or Diwani-based typeface. For me, at the moment, it's more about a certain amount of experience that and knowledge about the script that tells me what works for text, what works for display, what works for newspapers, what works for websites, and so on. And so it's a mix of influences that we use, whether in proportions or letter structure, or like, let's say, all the Arabic adaptations that are happening recently in the last few years for Latin grotesques. They still sometimes are called Nasr-based or Nasr-influenced, but if you look at them in details, there's a lot of other styles. There's a lot of Kufi in them. There's a lot of, the solid styles that are being infused in them. And I think it's time we start looking at the categorization of Arabic as typographic and rather than calligraphic.
Yeah, maybe you have a point. I think maybe it's just we need to start to also create new definitions or new classifications, because you do need classifications. And,
of course.
And it's always difficult to start from nothing, And
yeah.
I mean, if from my work, when I do research on type design, on ancient, on old printing types, they always define them. It's interesting. They don't have these definitions. They do, but they do define some things per style. So they would say it's a Thuluth font, and it's not as it's not really. It's a kind of simplified Thuluth, or they would call Nasri or Rukri or Nastali. They call it Farsi in Arabic. So I think they classify them. So I think we've inherited that. And
of course. And it makes sense, and it made sense for a certain time. But I think we are starting to move into a different era, and we could look into getting rid of these older labels, basically.
Yeah, but how do you replace them? I mean, in Latin, it's easy. You have serif, sans serif, and slab serif. It's kind of like physical descriptions, and there's not. And within these physical descriptions, there could be huge differences. So a serif.
No, but I mean, there's a lot more categories. Yeah, but there's a lot more categories than serif and sans serif. There's the humanist, there's the grotesque, there's the geometric, it's sometimes. I mean, it could be that it's a bit too early to start a very standardized thing in Arabic. But I mean, I think it's going to happen organically with time when there's enough material. But I mean, we could also that's a lovely idea to just have a symposium and to discuss these things, right?
Come up with a new...
come up with new terms. So that's how it happens. We eventually we are the ones who will need to do it at some point. So
yes,
ideas for the...
Indeed. I think it would be nice to talk about another thing, kind of on this note of terminologies and how we talk about things, with the latest kind of trendy statements that are politically driven in graphic design and also type design discourse about what is authentic, and this term authentic that is also very vague. I mean, it could mean so many things. Authentic is authentic, is original, but like in a design and something that is digital, what is authentic? And also this idea of everything has to be decolonized, and those sort of ideas. And of course, with Arabic and with non-Latin fonts, it's always every time you do something modern, it's Latinized, and all these like terrible, trendy. I wouldn't say terrible, but let's say trendy statements. How do you feel about this? Like, how do you?
I'm not necessarily interested in trends, so try to stay away from them. But I mean, there's a public discourse also that is happening at the same time that has good intentions, of course, like the idea of decolonizing design or type design specifically. And I mean, to me, it's still sometimes ironic. I'm quite a sarcastic person, so I would say apologies to anybody who might get offended. But to me, it's still funny that all this decolonizing talk is still coming from the colonizing countries or the previously colonizing countries. So I would have probably
so it's just clearing their conscience more than anything
somehow. But at the same time, what it advocates for, I'm all for. I'm all for giving chances for people from underprivileged countries. I'm all for whether putting more effort into those countries in terms of education or giving more opportunities in terms of hiring people from that part of the world, especially when it's something that they are good at. I'm not saying it's about fitting a certain quota or anything. But in my own practice, and I've been asked this before, if I am looking for somebody to hire and I see designers in the Arab world or designers from whose Arabic script is native to them, I would much rather hire somebody from an underprivileged place and give them the opportunity than somebody who I know can get a lot of opportunities. Yeah. So that's the way I see it in my own practice. And if I want to give an educational program, I would rather much more like we did with Arabic Type Design Beirut, to do it in Beirut or to do it somewhere in the Arab world. We wanted to do it in Cairo. It hasn't happened because of COVID and so on. But I would rather do it in a place where I know it's more needed and can cause a bigger effect for the people who are there than in a place where, has more privileges. So that is not to say that I don't give workshops in Europe or in the West or whatever. I do it all the time. But where my heart lies is in the places where I feel more needed. And that's what I try to do more. So that's the extent of my involvement in this, or how I perceive this whole idea of decolonizing and so on. And it's happening, and not just with me, but I'm sure a lot of people are doing it. And when it comes to this, I'm all for this, and I'm like, yay, good for everybody who's doing this. But when it becomes just about a trend and about fitting a certain quota, or I'm in all kinds of trying to establish a certain balance with minorities and so on, I'm all for let's do it, but also be mindful of how you're doing it, and don't just do it because it's a trend or because it reflects better on your own brand or something like that, okay. Which is very common as well, of course.
Very common, unfortunately. Yeah. But that's human nature. But, speaking of teaching and giving workshops, I had a question for you because, of course, you teach in the Netherlands and you teach, also when you teach in the Arab world, with your workshops, you also have a mix of students. Some of them are native to the script and some of them are not. And of course, that's a challenge when you have them both in the same class. But I wonder whether you have any kind of interesting remarks from your experience of what it's like for students to work on a script they don't know, can't read, not familiar with, and what it's the advantage and disadvantage of that, and vice in comparison to someone who is native to the script. That's also can sometimes be maybe there are also disadvantages there. I don't know. What is your experience? I'm curious.
There are definitely differences in the way you approach a certain topic when you know that you're teaching people who are native of the script or can read the script or not. But at the same time, the discipline of looking at certain shapes as a type designer and how you can deduct certain information or certain knowledge is really, at the end of the day, letters are abstract drawings. And whether you can know what is the sound behind it or not doesn't always affect how you understand the shape. For me, it's more about immersing yourself in the culture. That's why, again, when we did Arabic Type Design Beirut, we insisted on doing it in the Arab world, in Beirut specifically in this case, because we wanted people to be surrounded by the script, to be able to see it when they go out for walks and so on. So this is, for me, the essential part in all of this. But practically, of course, when I'm teaching students in type media who don't have an Arabic background or they don't know anything about the Arabic script, I'm not going to teach it the same way. I need to introduce to them the letters and the sounds and how they work together and so on. where this part is easier for people who are native of the script. But for example, in the first year when we did Arabic Type Design Beirut, we had a split class between professionals, type design professionals who are not natives of the script, and young students who are not familiar with the discipline of type design but were native of the script. And so we had to focus, like some needed to be more introduced better to the discipline of type design, and some needed to be introduced to the script more. So we would divide our effort equally in different ways, but you know what I mean. Yeah, it really depends on who is in front of us in this case. Because you do different things. You give them different exercises, of course, if somebody knows the script. But at the end of the day, knowing a certain script, being native of a certain script, doesn't mean you understand how it works, or you understand its proportions, or you understand how the contrast works. So this kind of common knowledge for the discipline of type, this applies to any kind of person with any background.
But you said something that I think I also find important, immersing yourself in the culture. So it's of course there's a shape, and of course the basics you have to learn, and whether you learn the technique or the script itself. But there is something like that is very important, that is culture, the connotations of what these shapes mean and how they are used and how people perceive them, not necessarily read them, but perceive them. And do you find that, how do people react to, how do your students react to this cultural aspect, which takes time? It's not something you can just browse through, and it's also sometimes being immersed in a culture, it becomes so background to you that you're also not aware of it, even if you are, so what is, I'd like to hear if you ever noticed.
That's the thing.
It sticks out in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of myself, I only became aware of all of these things after I moved out of Lebanon. So not while I was living there. That's why I keep saying that I connected properly with my own script, with my own heritage outside of Lebanon, because I started seeing it from an external point of view, and you learn a lot more about it this way. You look at it from a more analytical point of view rather than just as part of your background, basically.
Yeah.
So talking about immersing yourself in the culture, it's not something you can teach, obviously. I can, of course, guide them to places that they can look at, or to museums, or to streets that they can walk and see things around. But you cannot teach this necessarily. This is something I always say when somebody asks me, do you mind if non-natives of the script design Arabic typefaces? And my answer is always, no, not really, as long as they immerse themselves in the culture and not just jump on the bandwagon and okay, let's do it because everybody else is doing it. If you have a genuine interest in a certain culture and want to bring its script into typefaces, then I would expect that you are going to immerse yourself in the culture, probably visit a few countries, research a bit more. You immerse yourself in the culture by researching, by researching, whether it's a practical research or more theoretical research, but any kind of research. But you research, and that's how you get familiar. Maybe you will, I don't know, have some friends from that region talk about their mentality and how they think and how they see things. So that's how I see being immersed in the culture, but that's not something I can teach. You know what I mean? When I teach students who don't know or who are not natives of the script, I'm teaching them how to look at the letters, how to understand the letters. And I try, of course, to infuse here and there things from the culture. But at the end of the day, it's about their own effort in immersing themselves in the culture and understanding it better. Sometimes I also feel like just me being me, they will get some form of idea of what the culture is. You know what I mean? We also represent our cultures, whether we know it or not. So, yeah.
In some ways, each one in a different way, which is, of course, yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about something also different that I find really beautiful and fascinating in your practice is all your lettering work, all the things you do for your own pleasure, I guess. You want to talk about? Yeah, I see it behind you. No, lettering, you say not to go back to calligraphy, but this is a sort of form of contemporary calligraphy, actually. How do you work? I mean, do you want to tell me like how, the listeners, how you started in this, and how, how you work, and
so it's just a small distinction.
why you
It's
do
true,
it?
the forms are calligraphic forms, but the discipline itself is not calligraphy, because I'm not writing this, I'm drawing this. So the moment it's drawing, it's already lettering. So that's just as terms. But the forms, of course, are calligraphic forms. I'm very much interested by the beauty of calligraphy, and I've always loved it on one hand, and on the other hand found some form of gap between me and my time and my personality and people my age and the expression of this discipline. And I wanted to find stuff that are, or forms or expressions that are more similar to me and people like me, basically. So that also applies to type, by the way. But in calligraphy or in lettering, it started as a way out of type, believe it or not. I didn't go too far away from type because it's still very much about the Arabic letters. Okay. But for me, it was out of the rigidity of type, because type can be, of course, super expressive and like you can very elaborate and ornate and whatever. But at the end of the day, you are designing a software that has to carry all kinds of content and all kinds of text, and it has a certain rigidity that you cannot get out of.
It's
but in
very
lettering,
systematic and
yeah. In lettering, you can be much more free. You can be much more expressive. You can use colors. I mean, now of course there are colored fonts, but still it's not the same. So and I needed a break from the black and white, from the system, just to be a bit outside, the system. And that's how it started. It started as a break from this. And in a way, I can count myself one of the lucky ones whose work is also somehow my hobby. I love doing this, so I do it. I started doing it not because I was commissioned to do anything. I was doing it just for my own pleasure. And then I started noticing a certain fascination that I have with complex shapes, with complex compositions, with puzzles especially. I'm always happy when people spend more time to decipher a certain poster or to try to read it, but they cannot read it, And I always, like, if you look at what the common point in most of my lettering work, it's that people always need to spend some time to decipher what they are looking at. And so it became this kind of exciting challenge that every time I wanted to make something a bit more complex. And throughout this as well, explore different styles, learn about different styles and how I can find contemporary expressions of all these styles, and what I can mix, and which influences to use for what purpose, and so on. So I learned things through these lettering posters that also influenced my type discipline as a whole. But I mean, the basic point of why I do this, I do it just to have fun. So it's really for.
Well, it sounds like a very, I don't dare to ask you what your hobby is, because it seems like it is there. Your work is also your hobby.
It is.
But, I also, I find them also really beautiful and intriguing. And I wonder, like, how do you really start to work on them? Do you sketch by hand, or do you directly go into the computer and draw, or are they on the computer? I guess they are digital in some way.
Yeah. They're all vector drawings.
They're all
not
vector
just digital,
drawing.
but vector drawing. Yeah.
Okay. Vector drawings. Okay.
Yeah. Because I also get asked this a lot, and even though they all look very meticulously planned, because they are really like puzzles, the truth is they are not. They are very completely improvised. And I just start like whenever all these super ornamental things, I never like draw a sketch for the whole thing. I start from the top and I start going down. And that's for me how it becomes very interesting, because at the end I get to a point where I really just have to fit the puzzle together. Otherwise it wouldn't work. So I never know that if it's going to work properly from the moment I start, because I don't really have a sketch, especially for the very ornamental stuff. I just start filling up the space from top to bottom. And then I get to a point where, okay, what do I do here? And then it becomes about finding ways and finding solutions for this. So that's one of the things I enjoy the most as well. I mean, that's not to say that I never ever sketch. The basic lettering itself, I always have a basic sketch of it, of course. But if you look at the lettering posters you're talking about, there's always a lot of ornaments around them in one way or another. And these are the ones that I always want to have them completely improvised. Yeah. So luckily, because I draw in vector as well, things can always be adjusted. And if there's a need, if I get to a point where things just don't fit at all, I will always find a different solution. But the idea is to always go with the flow and see where it leads, and eventually deal with the consequences of the choices I made, basically. So sometimes I get to a point where, okay, I cornered myself too much in this and I don't know what to do here, but somehow the solution always comes up eventually.
So they are kind of like beautiful, complex doodles on a computer.
Yeah, in a lot of ways they are doodles.
But it sounds also like you work like a painter. You start and you kind of let the material evolve as you work on it. I think that's really beautiful too. And you feel that energy somehow. You really do feel it in all these posters. I mean, that's also what makes them really beautiful. They're not ornamental in the sense of like your how you imagine Islamic art to be ornamental, where it's completely thematically constructed. These are just like wild, like you're having some kind of wild dreams, or like a party, or whatever.
A party. I mean, to me, it's a very meditative process. So I looking at things over and over again, it becomes some sort of a trance, to be honest, because you are looking at the same thing for hours and hours on end, and then you see it everywhere. Like when you move your eyes from the computer, you still see it somewhere, because you're so used to looking at these shapes and I have to say that sometimes it takes over my nights, because I don't do this normally during the day. It's an extra thing. I don't do it during working hours. So sometimes it takes over my night, that I'm obsessing over these things until they are done. And I never have a lettering piece that I could start and finish on the same night, because they are all very complex. So it takes, it takes over several nights, sometimes a few weeks of my nights until I get it done. And I always take it as some form of meditation, because I have to slow down when I'm doing these things. These things cannot be done in a fast manner. You always have to take your time, observe, do something, look at it. Does it work? Does it not work? Do it again sometimes, and again and again, so until it works. So there's a lot of meditation in this.
Okay, I have a few more questions, so we'll go through them maybe fast.
Okay.
It can be really fast. Like, what is the project you have done so far that you're most proud of?
I don't have I never think this way. I mean, obviously there are projects that I prefer over other projects, but in general, if I'm proud of one thing, I'm proud of like the whole thing, the whole approach to type, and that I managed to find my own voice in type. And what I look at my typefaces and I see always a common point, however different they are from each other. Sometimes they are quite similar, and I'm not afraid of this, because at the end of the day, it's me drawing these things, and they can look similar, and because it's also my voice. And sometimes your voice is, in one or another situation is quite similar, but has this different timbre or different tone or a different volume, but they still have the same core. So if I'm proud of anything, it's that I managed to find my voice in this. That's
And of course, like in everything you do, sometimes you have projects you enjoy working most on, and others you enjoy less.
True, but I have been mostly lucky that I have enjoyed working on 99% of the projects
that's fantastic.
So far. So yeah. Because I also try to find the beauty in everything I'm working on. It's not that every project is amazing, but I always try to focus on what I like in a certain project. There have been, sometimes of course you also get difficult clients and so on, but with my own projects I always follow what I like, and it's easy to design your own typefaces when you like them, you know what I mean? And it's always either a personal exploration, either something I want to see. So of course I'm enjoying doing that. Or with Peter Bilak, the founder of TPTQ and my partner at TPTQ Arabic, we always discuss sometimes creating the Arabic adaptation of a certain Latin, and I have a lot of appreciation for what TPTQ does. So bringing this kind of innovation into Arabic, or this kind of thinking into Arabic, is also a very interesting challenge for me. So yeah.
What is the most challenging thing for you about making precisely these adaptations? What is the most challenging part? People have such strong opinions about this, so it's different people. Look at something and say like, this is doing this, it's doing that.
The fact is that there are a lot more Latin typefaces than there are Arabic typefaces, and the fact is that as a discipline, the Latin type design field is much more established, and that's perfectly fine, which means that for a lot of our projects will be Arabic adaptations of Latin typefaces, and that's also perfectly fine. There's a lot of things that we can learn from a field that has been established for a longer period of time, and that has explored very large territories and still is going, there's a lot of amazing people doing wonderful work, and we can learn a lot from them, including Peter and Nicola and other designers whose typefaces are published by TPTQ. And so for me, of course, it's challenging because these are two very different scripts, but at the same time, I never find it limiting because I never try to imitate the Latin. For me, the point is to understand the Latin, understand where it comes from, understand its roots, its origins, its intention, and then trying to create something similar for the Arabic, but never about chopping off forms or even imposing ideas that do not belong in the Arabic. For example, one of the typefaces I designed in Arabic was called Qanun, which is the Arabic adaptation of Peter's November, and we even changed the name to Arabic because not to translate it, but because they had different concepts. I have designed, for example, Greta Text Arabic for Greta Text, but they had the same concept, so I was able to translate the same ideas into the Arabic. But this one, the Latin was about the European industrial signage in the West, in Europe, and this is not something. This is not a concept that you can impose on Arabic. So I had to go for a completely different concept for the Arabic, which was about finding the rational forms or the rational elemental forms of Arabic, and that's why I called it Qanun to say that, hey, it has a different concept, but they do work well together on the same page. Other adaptations, they can have the same concepts. I'm not somebody who believes that if you design a certain adaptation for a Latin typeface, that they constantly have to only be used together and that's it. No, you're designing something that have the same expression, but you can end up using it with a different Latin typeface. You can end up having a different tone for the Latin, for the Arabic. So there's a lot of different ways of combining or pairing Arabic and Latin, and it doesn't always have to be the specific Arabic adaptation of that. But other than that, I really don't find it limiting to design Arabic adaptations because you can still do almost everything you want to do for the Arabic, and it would be very Arabic, very contemporary, and it works. The point is that it works and it's legible and has no problems and so on.
You've never had that issue where people say about the work, well, that is not authentic enough because, in their mind, authentic is a very specific style of Arabic, or it has to be.
No, not necessarily. I actually, if anything, I had other comments where they think, oh, your work is too classical. So,
classical.
I mean, for people who look at modern Arabic as the Latinized Arabic, they're going to think my work is classical because it's not Latinized. So,
what do you mean by Latinized? Maybe you can.
Latinized, as in the ones that have a very Latin contrast, that has a certain imitation of an X height for the Latin. For me, it's mostly about the contrast, because what gives a certain script its main look is beyond the forms, it's the contrast, because it's exactly about the effect of the tool that you are using on the forms. And sometimes, even if you have completely different forms, but apply the exact same contrast on them. And it's not about vertical stress or horizontal stress. It's about the modulation of the contrast, the movement of the contrast, the distance that it takes from the thick to the thin, and all of this. You can easily tell if something is taken from another script and imposed on another script. And then this is what I mean by Latinized. And this was a popular thing a couple of decades ago, still is in some places in the Arab world. And if somebody looks at this as the modern Arabic type, then they're going to look at my work and say, okay, yours is classical.
Do you find inspiration sometimes in, like when I always think of authentic, I sometimes also look at like very vernacular, kind of almost unprofessional lettering of book covers from the 60s and 70s, which had a little bit the freedom you have in your own lettering. They just did things, of course.
Absolutely.
It was just like they were making drawings, drawings of shapes. Do you find inspiration in these things, or you're not at this stage?
Absolutely. I absolutely loved the freedom that they had, that still had a lot of knowledge and a lot of information, and even if a lot of rejection to the classical rules, but they knew what they were rejecting. That's the point. For me, that's exactly the same thing. What I hope to achieve in my own work is that whatever I choose to reject or to rebel against or to even use or whatever, I want to be aware of what happened before me, so I can use it to my advantage and to reflect the context that we are in. And there was this very experimental phase in the Arab world where there was a lot of publications happening, and so there was a big need for lettering and some form of typefaces as well. That is super inspirational. Not to the point that I would say I would want to do the exact same thing, but I'm inspired by the knowledge that they had and the freedom they felt to be able to do all these things. So for sure, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think is relevant in the future for type design? I mean, we talked about classification. Now we talk about this idea of being like really knowledgeable, but at the same time being free. But do you think, how do you think like the field is developing? Because now I go on Instagram and there's a lot of people doing type design. I mean, not lettering, but type design. And some of it is, it's like within a style that's been around. But then once in a while you find like little jewels here and there. So I don't know how you feel about it. Do you check out what other people are doing? Once in a while?
Not so much, because I just don't
don't have time.
It's not about not have time, but to be honest, when I want to go on Instagram or whatever, I'm looking at completely other things like furniture and ceramics and stuff like that. That's what I don't check a lot of other typefaces that are, of course I see my colleagues and what they're doing, I'm aware of that, but not, like there's a lot of things that are happening that I'm not aware of. But that doesn't mean that I'm not appreciative of this. I'm very excited that there are a lot more people doing these things now. I think that what we need is, at the moment, is exactly what's happening. So a lot more people doing the work, and hopefully a lot more people educating themselves on the topic and producing aware and rooted typefaces, and with knowledge to the past, and also with looking towards the future. And I think that eventually, with time, things are going to be filtered, and the good stuff will stay, and the bad stuff, not bad stuff, but the stuff that doesn't stand the test of time. Exactly. And I think that's what's going to happen in the future, which is what always happens. At least hopefully. I'm sure there are people doing amazing work, but they are somewhere in the dark and people don't have access to their work. And I hope that now it's more difficult for people to remain in the dark unless they really don't make any effort to put their work out there. But things are much more easier to access nowadays. So I hope that these people are putting their work out there. And I hope that eventually we will see more of this, so we have enough material to start talking about proper classification and see what the future holds. But the technology of type is also moving quite fast. The type design world in the Latin field, for example, is developing super fast and in ways that we are still very far from in the Arabic world. But we also have a different task at hand now. we have a lot more to explore before we think of, colored fonts or whatever, which is still nice to do, and variable fonts and all of this. It's all nice experiments, but there's a lot more work to be done before, we say, okay, now we are saturated and we need to think of other stuff. What I hope the future holds is more typefaces that are aware of our script, and that express our own voices now, that are not stuck in the past, and that are not, rejecting stuff that they don't even know about. So,
Yeah. I think that's kind of a good definition of authentic in my mind. Also, being cultured and being innovative and being aware and being conscious of what you're doing and doing it with all honesty, like finding your own voice. I mean, that's as authentic as you can ever get, instead of.
That's true.
What are your plans in the coming, what are you cooking up as exciting projects in the coming 4 or 5 years? Where do you see your work going?
I actually just made the list just before New Year's of all the fonts that we have that are somewhere in the works, and the list was like 13 different families or something that are somewhere in the process. Some of them are towards the end, some of them are somewhere in the beginning, some of them are in the middle. There are also, custom typefaces that somehow slow down the work on retail stuff, because you have a client, you have a deadline, you have to deliver on time and everything. And there are a couple that we are working on now in terms of custom, but there's also a lot of retail typefaces that some of them have been in the works for several years, including Kunduz, for example. And I hope that we will be publishing a lot more typefaces this year. The last couple of years we were very busy, focused on some custom stuff. Unfortunately, the biggest one we cannot talk about, but that's how it is.
We're working for one of those big American multinationals,
which is understandable. That's part of the job. But some custom typefaces we will be talking about. Last year we designed a new typeface for the Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum, which is in Latin and Arabic. Nice. Which was a nice full circle, because a few years ago I had designed the first Arabic typeface for them, and now we continued. We designed a new family basically that was in addition to the one that I designed before, but now this one is Arabic and Latin. There's a couple of new custom typefaces that will be coming out hopefully in the coming 2 years. We will be talking about those, and as I said, plenty of retail typefaces to be done. And some super exciting stuff. So we will start the releases hopefully from this month, and hopefully release a few of them this year.
Are all the fonts that you are publishing, most of the fonts you are publishing are initiated with the foundry? You don't publish other people's typefaces?
No, we do. It depends on what kind of applications we got, what kind of submissions. I have to say that I haven't been getting a huge amount of amazing typefaces, but we are at the moment. I'm working with Naima Ben Aid on a typeface that she will be publishing with us, with Amir Moslehi from Iran, with Sina Fakour. We work with many designers, and they're all publishing their typefaces with us, and sometimes also collaborating with us on our own typefaces. So no, we're always definitely happy to publish other people's typefaces, but it has to fit within our library. And I'm a bit picky when it comes to these things.
I totally agree. It has to. I think it's important that you have a sort of image to the foundry, that you go to this type foundry for this type of work, you go to that one for that type of work. You make it easier also for the users to know, where to go when they are in need of specific style or specific kind of fonts.
Exactly. A specific approach to type, I would say. And I'm always happy to receive submissions, but not few of them make it to release eventually.
No, that's okay. Do you have any final statement or word of advice?
Not necessarily. I think
you want to talk about that I didn't ask you about.
Not really. This was a lovely interview. You asked a lot of amazing questions. I would say that I'm just excited about the world of type Arabic type specifically nowadays. I am happy that there are a lot more people doing work, a lot more people interested in studying as well. And yeah, everything I wanted to say, I think I already said. Maybe a reminder that please research and get yourself immersed in the culture and the script before you attempt to design a typeface. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, I think you have to start somewhere. So I think we don't want to scare people, but I think if you're serious about becoming a type designer, you should really
Of course.
I mean, and not just like, pick a few known tricks and then just keep applying them.
Sure.
I agree with you. I'm just curious when you're going to offer your next, you have plans to offer the next Arabic type design Beirut.
We've been talking about it.
Beirut.
COVID affected all of us in different ways. And, then the situation happened in Lebanon. And the idea is to do it again, hopefully this summer, but I cannot guarantee it yet, but hopefully this coming summer.
Okay, thank you, Kristyan. This was a really lovely talking to you.
Thank you again for always including me in your project and for your support.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
For the lovely questions.
Thank you and have a lovely evening. Bye.